I'll begin talking about archaeological techniques by reminding you about two principles that are important for interpretation and then covering vocabulary in this first PowerPoint. In the second PowerPoint, I'll talk about the steps or procedures or stages in archaeological investigations. So two important principles that we've talked about before are Uniformitarianism and the law of superposition, also known as Steno's law. Uniformitarianism states that rates and processes in the past were the same as can be observed today. This means that we can look around us today to help us interpret what we see in the past. The law of superposition states that in undisturbed deposits, deeper strata will be older. Let's begin some basic vocabulary. Fossils are rocks. They may be mineralized organic remains, such as bones that have been replaced by rock, such as you see here, or they may be impressions, such as footprints. An artifact is an object that has been made, used, or altered by humans. Here you see an example of a pebble chopper, one of the earliest stone tools made by humans. This is an animal bone with cut marks from butchering. So here you see a rock. Is this a fossil or is it an artifact? Well, it's an artifact because it's been made by humans. Humans made that sharp edge. How about this skull? Well, it's a fossil. It's rock. It's embedded in rock. You can still see rock inside of it. A fossil locality is a place where fossils are found. Fossil localities occur only under special conditions of preservation. And taphonomy, the study of the processes that affect bones after the death of an animal, help us figure out the conditions under which an animal skeleton, for example, might become fossilized. This deer skeleton lying on the surface of the ground is not likely to be fossilized. You can look at different examples of natural taphonomic factors such as weathering, the soil pH, bacteria, scavenging by animals. So that deer skeleton lying on the surface is going to be exposed to weathering and to scavenging by animals. But there are also cultural factors such as have you cooked the meat? Was the bone in the meat when you were cooking it? Did you boil it? What sorts of cultural things imposed upon the bone that might be recovered. Hence, the life assemblage, that is, the animals that were living in the area, will be reduced in what we see in the death assemblage, reduced further in what gets deposited, that is, what was eaten versus what was deposited. Then you go through a whole slew of post-depositional taphonomic factors to get to what the archaeologist or the paleoanthropologist actually finds. A site is a place where human activity occurred. So I want to emphasize that definition. It's a place, and it's a place where human activity occurred. It is not where archaeologists dig. That's a terrible definition. I'm an archaeologist. I dig in my backyard. That doesn't make my backyard a site. So a site is a place where human activity occurred, and most sites are never found, and certainly even fewer are excavated. Archaeologists study human behavior through material remains. They're interested in uncovering clues to culture, and they excavate at archaeological sites. The phrase material remains is also important. I know a lot of students want to say that archaeologists uncover human remains, but to an archaeologist, human remains means skeletons. Material remains refers to artifacts and features. Paleoanthropologists search for an understanding of early humans and human ancestors. They excavate at fossil localities, which may also be archaeological sites. Midden is trash mixed with dirt. It may occur spread across an area as this sheet midden, or it may fill a feature. Midden is usually black in color because it has so much organic material mixed in with the dirt, and it contains many artifacts. Matrix is the dirt that holds and supports artifacts and features, as well as the site itself. Sterile refers to dirt that contains no cultural remains. A living floor or surface refers to an ancient surface upon which activities took place. A feature is a non-portable artifact embedded in the matrix, such as a hearth or a postmold. Here you see two successive puddled clay hearths inside a house. This is where they cook the food. The original hearth is lower down, meaning that it's older in age or was deposited first. The house was rebuilt after a flood, and here is the new hearth stratigraphically above the old hearth. So how can an archaeologist define a feature? Well, there are several clues in the field. The dirt inside the feature is likely to have a different texture. It's also going to have a different color, and it's often dark because it's filled with midden. It will contain artifacts, one hopes, and the shape and size of it might help you figure out what kind of feature it is. Provenience refers to the exact horizontal and vertical location of something. A datum is a reference point made at a site or fossil locality. Datums are used for establishing a grid, that is, for horizontal mapping, and perhaps also for vertical reference. Since both archaeologists and paleoanthropologists are interested in human behavior, we act like CSI investigators. So the context and association of artifacts, features, living floors are important for interpreting the behavior. Hence, we need to map what we find three-dimensionally. Here's an example of two students mapping horizontal mapping of something and vertical mapping. We used to use a string with a line level on it, stretched from a datum. Nowadays, we use a laser level and a total station. Here I am in March of 2020 shooting this target far away down inside a backhoe trench. Stratigraphy refers to layering, and that layering could be layers of dirt at an archaeological or paleontological site, or it could be layers of rocks. So we use the word strata, meaning layers, or stratum, singular, a layer. In undisturbed deposits, deeper strata are older. Archaeologists and paleoanthropologists need to be able to distinguish natural deposition from cultural deposition. This is extremely important. Hence, we need to know a lot about dirt and soil formation processes, because our sites and fossil localities are embedded in the matrix of dirt, usually. We would look kind of foolish if we made a large interpretation only to find out that what we were looking at was natural versus the cultural interpretation that we gave. So we record the texture of the dirt, that is, the ratios of the various grain sizes, which from largest to smallest are sand, silt, and clay. And we record the color of the dirt using an international dirt color chart called the Munsell Soil Color Chart. We also record many other things besides texture and color. But doing so allows us then to interpret a profile or sideways view like this through a mound in central South Carolina. So I'll begin here at what was, in AD 1200 or so, the ground surface, and it was around in here. How can I tell that? Well, the texture and content of the soil tells me that this was an A horizon, that is the topsoil, with here's the topsoil, with the B horizon underneath, extending on down past where we excavated. People lived on top of here, throwing down midden. So they left a sheet midden, which accumulated through time. So the surface here kind of rose up as people were living there and throwing down trash underfoot. Then at some point they decided to build a mound here, and they began with a very small stage of dirt that they collected from elsewhere on the site. We can tell that because it's full of artifacts. And yet it has a very different texture than the dirt immediately below it. They had several structures associated with this mound stage, and this profile happens to cross-cut one of the post molds. That is a place where a wooden post used to be in the ground. When the post rotted, the dirt from above fell down into the hole. They then went off-site to a place where there were no artifacts, to sterile dirt. This would have been over toward the river to find dirt of this type or textures and colors, and collected dirt of 3 different colors, yellow, black, and gray, and built a much larger mound stage on top. Now the stage went higher than we see in this picture, but then long after the Indians abandoned the site, Euro-Americans came in and farmed here, and in doing so eroded and wore down the top of the mound. And what we are left with today is the depth of the plow. So the plow zone, the total mixing of stuff by modern agricultural implements. So in the second slideshow, Archaeological Techniques 2, learn about the stages in archaeological investigations.